Look around the room you're in right now. Now imagine a specific, heavy silence dropping over that room when every single earthly support system you rely on just vanishes. It's a crushing weight, right? That feeling of absolute isolation is profound. In this explainer, we're going to tear into exactly why that happens and, more importantly, what it's actually designed to do to you. You know that specific silence I'm talking about. It hits when friends pull away, your resources dry up, and the phone literally stops ringing. Modern society usually looks at this and brands it as a total failure. I mean, the signals we get from the world basically scream that if you're standing completely alone, you must have done something terribly, terribly wrong. When you're stuck in that quiet space and it feels like your cries for help are just hitting a brick wall, it's entirely natural to assume you've been neglected, or worse, completely forgotten. But we've got to challenge that assumption right out of the gate. What if that absolute isolation isn't a punishment at all? What if hitting rock bottom is actually a sacred, absolutely mandatory prerequisite for your transformation? The source material we're looking at introduces this really radical idea. Reaching absolute zero isn't a sign you've been abandoned. Actually, it's the exact opposite. This 0 point is an intentional foundation. It is the absolute bedrock upon which something entirely new has to be built.
Section 1. The weight of absolute zero.
So before we can really grasp the purpose of this heavy, heavy weight, we need to establish a baseline. It is incredibly tough to just sit in a place where your calls for help seem echo back at you. And that brings us to a really fascinating concept, the wilderness. Now, historically, almost every ancient culture used a structured wilderness phase, a forced isolation, as a rite of passage. So we really need to define this, not just as some physical place of exile like a literal sandy desert, but as an intentional, historical, and spiritual protocol. Hitting absolute zero is no accident. You aren't just lost. You've been enrolled in something highly specific.
Section 2. Entering the Wilderness Protocol.
Okay, so how do we actually enter this protocol? Well, we have to reframe this isolation as a highly effective removal tool. Just look at the stark contrast we've got here. Modern life, it operates at a deafening volume. We're constantly insulated by these shallow support systems. And let's be honest, we're totally addicted to the constant hit of human applause. But the wilderness, it operates entirely on silence. It demands that your attachments be stripped away and forces this massive shift toward permanent reliance. Before you can be rebuilt, the things you're leaning on right now simply have to go. This isolation literally forces you to drop the unseen crutches you probably didn't even know were propping you up. And just look at the sheer timeline of preparation we're dealing with here. It brilliantly illustrates this repeated, historical pattern where comfort removal and psychological clearing were absolutely mandatory. Think about Abraham. Day one, he leaves his familiar world and every single safety net he possessed. Then you've got Joseph, spending years alone in an Egyptian prison, completely stripped of his status. Moses? 40 years as an exile in the desert just to unlearn his past. David spent years hiding as a fugitive in caves. That was the crucible that shaped his entire character. And even Jesus faced a moment of absolute crushing isolation in the dark of Gethsemane. History shows us time and time again that this psychological clearing is literally the only way to shift your reliance from a temporary world towards something permanent.
Section 3. The logic of silence.
Now, when your calls for help meet absolute silence, it feels like a total withdrawal of support, doesn't it? As humans, we demand immediate answers. We just want the pain to stop. But here is the massive perspective shift. That silence, it indicates active, unseen preparation that's unfolding far beneath the surface. True preparation follows a completely different logic. It absolutely does not yield to human standards of timing or our petty desire for convenience. The silence is required. It's required to forge the humility and the character you're going to need for the work that lies ahead. It's doing something to your core that noise and comfort simply cannot achieve.
Section 4. The climax of surrender.
So this preparation eventually drags you to a point of total depletion. It's that climax, the precise moment you finally admit, I cannot take one more single step on my own. To really humanize this turning point, let's look at the Apostle Paul. He described having this agonizing thorn in the flesh that he literally begged to have removed. His prayers for immediate relief, totally denied. But the answer he did receive completely flipped his perspective on unanswered prayers. He learned that the denial of immediate comfort was actually clearing the room from much, much greater power to step in. And you can see that exact intersection happening right here. Over on the left, as human capacity, effort, and sheer endurance drain all the way down to absolute zero, it creates a vacancy. And it's only in that completely empty space that divine support, which you see maximizing right here, can perfectly step in. Power is made perfect exactly where our human weakness is fully exposed. Which forces us to completely redefine grace. Grace is not some fragile, fluffy, poetic sentiment. No way. It is a structural force. It is the solid framework that carries you when your own endurance is just gone. Unshakable strength cannot be produced by your sheer willpower alone. Actually, scratch that. It's impossible to produce it on your own. That kind of enduring strength is exclusively unlocked at the absolute limit of your own capability, precisely at the moment you surrender.
Section 5. Emerging structurally rebuilt.
That ultimate surrender leads directly to the goal of this entire crazy process. Emerging from this fire completely alters your internal composition. First off, you gain a lasting immunity to the need for human approval. The applause just doesn't control you anymore. You don't need it. Second, you are no longer dependent on those shallow safety nets that once felt so essential for your basic survival. And finally, you carry a brand new authority, and it's an authority that was lived, tested, and forged deep in your bones. This means that when you walk into a chaotic room today, you aren't operating on borrowed confidence anymore. You're operating on authority that was tested in the fire.
So if you happen to find yourself in this quiet, heavy space right now, here is the big takeaway. Stop despising this season of isolation. Stop trying to rush the process and escape the uncomfortable quiet. Instead, you've got to lean into the silence. Let the unseen preparation do its heavy, necessary work on your internal structure.
I want to leave you with this absolutely powerful final thought. When the storm finally breaks and people ask you how on earth you survived the absolute zero, you're going to realize this truth. Having no one but God was the exact condition needed to prove He was enough. So the next time the room goes entirely quiet, ask yourself, are you being abandoned or are you finally being prepared?